It was Sunday. The 3 days after Jesus was crucified and buried had gone by, and 2 of the disciples weren't convinced with what they heard from the women. The stone rolled away, the empty tomb. It seemed to them an idle tale, too fanciful to believe. What Donald Trump calls fake news. Luke tells us that they were on the road to Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem. Yet today, nobody is really sure where Emmaus was, much less why the disciples were going there. Frederick Buechner once memorably wrote that maybe the reason they went to Emmaus is because it was about 7 miles away from a situation that had become unbearable. As they walked, they were so engrossed in their conversation that they barely noticed the traveler who came up alongside them. When Jesus asked them what they were talking about, they stopped in their tracks. How can someone that close to Jerusalem not know what had gone on there over the last few days? Not recognizing Jesus for some reason, they gave him an update of what had happened. After the disciples told their story, Jesus took over. Starting with Moses and the prophets, he explained to them what was in the scriptures about him. At that point, they arrived at their destination, Emmaus. The 2 disciples invited this stranger to come inside and to share a meal. The 3 of them sat down at a table, and as they sat around the table, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them. And at that moment, their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. Something happened around that table in the breaking of bread and the sharing of it that caused the disciples to suddenly recognize their friend Jesus. It doesn't appear that Jesus did anything miraculous or extraordinary. It was just the common practice of blessing and breaking bread and sharing it with others. Jesus joining the disciples for a meal as their companion, a word which literally means one with bread. The simple act of sitting around a table and sharing a meal together is something a lot of people don't find particularly important, especially in our day of fast food and drive-thrus, where often a meal is shared out of a bag in a car. A meal has become no more than fuel. But the truth is, a shared meal is a vital part of the spiritual life. The theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer said that the scriptures speak of 3 different kinds of table fellowship that Jesus keeps with his people. 1, the daily fellowship at the table. 2, the table fellowship at the Lord's Supper. And 3, the final table fellowship in the kingdom of God. But in all 3, he said, the one thing that counts is that their eyes were opened and they knew him. They recognized him. When we welcome someone into our lives, when we share bread with someone, we always have an unexpected guest, Jesus himself. When we in the church talk about hospitality and all that means in our church, in our communities, in our world, I wonder what difference it would make if we got in our minds that when we welcome the outsider or the stranger, it is Christ that we welcome. Christ comes to us in 1,000 different disguises, incognito, as the outsider, the stranger, the friend, the neighbor. What difference would this make? There is a children's movie called Whistle Down the Wind, an old movie. In it, Hayley Mills plays a young girl who, along with 2 friends, is playing in a country barn. And while playing, they stumble across what appears to be a homeless man sleeping in the straw. "Who are you?" Mills asks him. The homeless man is startled awake by this intrusion and mutters, "Jesus Christ." And what he meant as a profanity, the children take as a literal answer to their question. This bedraggled man sleeping in the straw is Jesus Christ. And so for the rest of the movie, They treat this man with awe and reverence and respect. They bring him food and blankets. They sit and talk with him. They tell him about their lives, about their worries. Over time, their compassion transforms this man who turned out to be an escaped convict who has never known such attention and kindness. The person who wrote the story intended it as an allegory of what might happen if all of us took literally Jesus' words about his presence in the stranger, his presence in other people, that when we welcome them, we welcome Jesus, that when we serve them, we serve Jesus. When we invite them to dinner, we invite Jesus. If you go through the Gospels, you will find that Jesus spends a lot of time sitting at the dinner table. And you have to pay attention to those simple everyday moments around the table. You have to open your eyes. You have to wake up to the sacredness of those moments, because it is at precisely those times that Jesus is apt to show up, in the middle of life, at its most real and everyday, around a table, sharing a meal. All of the resurrection appearances have this in common. Jesus never blazed in from on high in a chariot of fire. It was always in the middle of everyday life, in a garden, on a dusty road, by a charcoal fire, around a table. The sacred moments are often those moments when we would least expect to experience the presence of God. There he is. And if we will look with our hearts and our imaginations, we might see Jesus himself, the love of God among us, sitting at the table.